Hello, today we're going to talk about government and how it always leads to anarchy. Now you say, well, Corey, anarchy means anarchon, it means no rulers. Well, a lot of people think it means chaos. And I talk about this a bit about how we should not use the word anarchy because it's just not generally appealing to people when it comes to talking about freedom, although it's signifying the fact that you perhaps rule yourself and therefore are of need of no external rulers other than yourself, or other than God, other than nature, right? So you rule yourself, or nature, or God helps rule you as well. Perhaps God is that guide within your life. Well, what do I mean when I say government leads to anarchy, or at least anarchy leads to government? And what is this perspective that I'm proposing here, which is another reason why I don't use the word anarchy? Well, it's important to understand this. So, and this has happened all throughout history, okay, is that although we can break down anarchon into no rulers, most people do perceive anarchy as chaos. Now, beside this being a downside within itself and me having a video about this topic and other words that you can use instead, such as just freedom or such as just nature or getting more specific, the idea of government, right, is having rulers. So it's the exact opposite of anarchy. Yet, if it always leads to a condition of chaos, like in the case of democide, which is death by government, like World War II, where you have millions and millions of people dying, and there's people destroying the streets and going crazy, you would say that's anarchy, right? And you'd say, well, there's no rulers there, there's no police, they're off guard. So government leads to anarchy and chaos in that regards, right? And then at the same time, anarchy can lead to government because when there's control, people then seek order. I mean, there's chaos, the people seek order. They seek some sort of authority figure to help change everything and bring it back into order, right? So this is, what a lot of presidents talk about in their speeches. They say peace and order. We need to create security and peace. And they use these words all the time to signify the fact that the world can go crazy, or there's this terrorist threat, or there's these other things that are happening, and therefore we can use it as an excuse for power, for control. And this is where statism must be inserted, because anarchy does not turn into government without statism. Okay, so let's just take anarchy as chaos for a second, or even just as its literal definition. If you still don't understand statism, if the mass public still doesn't understand statism, or their rights, or natural law, or their ownership, or the nature of authority, or the nature of democide, the nature of slavery, as I go into in my book, Slavery Gone for Good, that statism is mental slavery, if they don't understand that concept, then yes, their statism, their mental slavery is going to lead to another government. Even if that government has said, okay, we're not a government anymore, it doesn't work like that. And you can't just get rid of it. The thing is that statism is the very thing that maintains it and the very thing that grows it. So long as there's statism, so long as there's government. And that, of course, depends on the majority of people if they're willing to uphold such a system, right? And if they're unwilling to reason with the ability of ownership and understanding that they own themselves and don't own other people and don't have special rights that other people do not, right? There's reason to be made there that people should understand equality, not equality among just ourselves, but equality when it comes to classes, right? And you say, well, that's hierarchy. It's not hierarchy, it's involuntary hierarchy. It's the problem with an authoritarian state, which states always turn into. They always turn authoritarian. So this book describes it very well because it had to make that disclaimer. This book is called Radical Abolitionism. It says Anarchy in the Government of God and Anti-Slavery Thought. Now, I was pretty lucky to get a copy of this book because it's a really good book in my opinion. And it's written by Lewis Perry. He's a historian. You can see this one, it says Cornell University Press, right? And this is actually from 1973, but my gosh, the papers are really nice, the words, everything in this is really nice. They even conclude it's very nice, but he doesn't have any biases in this book, at least from what I've seen reading it. He's just giving out the facts, exactly how the abolitionists of the past presented their ideas and were very anti-authoritarian, anti-human authority, essentially, saying that the government of God was above that of man, and therefore they can use that as an argument against slavery. of all forms, right? And realizing that slavery can even extend not past chattel slavery and into government slavery, which is what I talk about in my book, Slavery Gone for Good, saying that basically slavery still exists, and the abolitionists of the past proved in their own words. I mean, this book literally proves exactly that. So this is a good book if anybody wants to find it. I mean, I was lucky to get this copy because I don't know if they're really making much, but a lot of people used it for research papers, and you can try to access it online. But yeah, this is amazing. I mean, this I can just find out. It's been borrowed like multiple times over the past decades. So very glad to have this in my hands because it goes over many different abolitionists, and I could give you a whole list of them that were also anarchists. But it first starts off the book talking about how anarchy is perceived so differently, because you cannot talk about the word anarchy without it going through a billion different barriers. There's understanding there's two inverse meanings to it, that anarchy can mean chaos to some and order to another. How could this be? Because they're two completely different definitions. If you're saying one is chaos and one is no rulers, one sounds like freedom and sounds like order, and the other just sounds like, well, mayhem and the need for order. And you say, well, freedom, how does that correlate with order? These concepts need to be understood. If they aren't understood by yourself, then I would recommend, checking out these books, like the one that I wrote. Now, not to plug my own book, but it's important to understand that anarchy is basically this idea that this gets so twisted throughout time. And it could be perceived in so many different ways, which is why I like how this book basically puts it into perspective. Now, that being said, you always have this situation where people are free, right? They're free to choose what they want to do. Basically, anarchy is seen as reality, like in Larkin Rose's book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, right? This one just has a whole chapter titled Anarchy is Reality. And that's a very striking difference from what a lot of people see. And that is something that is another perspective too. But it's basically saying that, anarchy is not something to be feared. It's something that's sort of inevitable because it's the natural condition of humankind. It's always inevitable that governments are going to turn to anarchy. And whether or not that anarchy will turn to another government is dependent on the people, since it's people that create government. Right? And that's where I come up with my message, nature is the answer, to say, well, wait, maybe we should actually understand what is natural, what is not, so we know what to keep, so we know what to maintain, so we know what to let grow versus what we really shouldn't have in existence, at least especially since government is purely based on a belief system that others have more rights or have the destined and vested authority within them. No, it's the fact that we're all equal that we must understand, and therefore anarchy is seen as order in that sense. So this can be really confusing to somebody who's never been, approached this way of logic. So if you're new to this logic, feel free to let me know. I certainly was. I thought anarchy was chaos right from the get-go, and I did not see it as anything other than that. And really just question for a moment what people really mean when they say anarchy. Most people, the problem is they think communism, socialism, these different types of things. It's the whole reason why I want to emphasize abolitionism, because it gets to the point as to saying what we're targeting is slavery. What we're targeting is rulers, right? And not saying that there aren't rules. There still are rules to human behavior. There always will. And people will set their own rules for their own businesses, right? Because that's their own business. And so that's always going to exist. Rules will always exist. You can't get rid of rules, but you can get rid of rulers, because no human is above another human. Right? They may be in some economic status and some knowledge ability, but that just makes them an inspiring leader. A leader, not a ruler. A leader is not a ruler. It's somebody who inspires and helps encourage other leaders and says, well, I don't seek power, I seek influence. And that's where I go into my video with natural leaders versus unnatural leaders. So when you understand all these concepts, maybe you've checked out these books, or maybe you've checked out my own book, maybe you'll understand anarchy a bit more, into the sense that actually government always leads to anarchy because it's the intended reality. And however, anarchy can lead to government if statism is present. So that's that, and I hope I delivered that message quite well, even though I had to repeat myself multiple times, and because there's a lot of confusing perspectives. But thank you very much for listening. This is Corey of Ninjalot, and Nature is the Answer.